Welcome to the next episode of Better Riding with me, Michael Mann from BikeSocial. This is episode 19 of the series brought to you by Bennetts and Honda Motorcycles UK. It offers tips and advice that will make you better at riding your motorbike. And of course, it doesn't matter whether you've been riding for 2 weeks or 52 years. There is always, and I promise, room for improvement. And alongside me is our very own motorbike coach, Mark McVeigh. But before we meet him, let me run through these credentials. So Mark is an experienced rider coach. He's an ex-MotoGP engineer. He's a riding academy owner for 20 years. He's also invented the MotoDNA rider training technology and has taught more than 10,000 riders to be smarter, safer, and more confident. G'day, Mr. McVeigh. How are you, sir?
Hey, Michael, I'm not too bad. How's things with yourself?
Fantastic. Thank you for asking. You're never going to get bored of me talking you up like that, are you? Every episode.
I'm a bit shy about it, to be honest, but yeah, thank you.
Now, Mr. McVeigh, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, today we are talking about proactive versus reactive, and it's really around motorcycle technology and ARAS technology. So as always, you know, it's always, we like to start with a story. And, you know, a few weeks ago, I was running an off-road adventure training ride. So, you know, in the mountains, small group of riders, and, you know, we're mainly on dirt roads and, you know, through rivers and that type of thing. But there is a few tarmac sections, you know, those, we call them transport sections. And they join up the fun bits, if you like. But I was leading and we're on the tarmac section and I was just accelerating out of this corner and essentially the TC just jumped in big time. The bike virtually stopped moving forward. There was just so much electronic control and, you know, both tires had a little bit of a slide, even though, you know, the traction control kicked in. But I hadn't spotted there was a bit of a diesel spill and bit of fuel on the ground, which I hadn't spotted. Now, because this is off-road, you know, we've got like 80% off-road adventure tires. You know, we've got to deal with, you know, deep sand and clay and stuff. So they're obviously not great tires for tarmac, but still, you know, who's to say that, you know, I could have saved that slide, you know, without the traction control.
It's easy to get wrapped up in these things, isn't it? I was on a press launch once in Portugal and the sand had blown onto the road. It is a perfectly smooth, smooth road, and a certain ex-British World Superbike champion was in the ride as well, and he thought the TC was off, gave it a handful, and of course it gripped and it jutted the rear tire, and he ended up falling off the bike. Thankfully, no harm was done except his ego. Anyway, good story and relevant. So in terms of motorcycle safety technology, you're a believer?
Well, you know, if you think about ABS, you know, it's this new tech, it's like that. It's kind of a no-brainer, you know, safety-wise for street riders. You know, we're living in this kind of revolution of motorcycling. You know, the bikes are bristling with sensors and algorithms and data-driven, you know, technology from cornering ABS and adaptive cruise control. So, you know, today's bikes are more, you know, aware and capable than ever, really.
Do you think that tech makes us better riders, or are we simply outsourcing safety to the technology?
Yeah, exactly. This is the whole point. So if you look at the crash stats, the tech doesn't really seem to be helping there. And, you know, I think the answer really lies in mindset. You know, our three pillars, the skill and the craft and the mind. And we have to ask ourselves, are we riding proactively or reactively? And that's kind of what we're teaching at the school. You know, even though we're trying track riders, you know, there's a bunch of them in the MotoGP, you know, and adventure riders, but it's mostly road riders, you know, 10,000 students over, you know, 15 years. And during that time, you know, we've been sponsored by OEMs, and what that means is there's really a steady feed of the latest bikes. You know, the last OEM, we had 30 bikes, you know, scattered around all the schools. So, you know, that's a steady feed then of kind of the latest bikes and the latest technology cycling through the school, so our coaching team get to ride and then test those bikes. But personally, I was wary of relying on the tech.
Is that because you are, how would I put this delicately, more experienced at riding?
Well, it's not because I'm old, although I'm nearly 60, but it's actually because I'm still racing. And it's called Superbike Masters. And my race bike, it's 160 horsepower, 160 kilos, but it has no electronics. So my mindset was, to try and keep my skills sharp, not relying on those electronics. And, even every week I'm mountain biking and riding enduro to kind of keep those slide skills sharp, if that makes sense.
You don't look anywhere near 60. But that race bike of yours sounds a bit fruity. Now, Mark, you talked about proactive versus reactive riding. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. So at the school, we're analyzing, thousands of data points, from road riders. And what we're seeing is the difference, between a skilled and an average rider. It's not about speed or bravery or anything like that. It's more about the anticipation. So, reactive riders seem to be waiting for something to sort of go wrong before they respond. They might grab the brakes mid-corner, they get a bit of a fright, or, rely on electronics to save a slide. Whereas proactive riders, there's a contrast there where they're kind of anticipating the change, and that looks like, scanning further ahead, adjusting their speed early, setting their body position up before the corner, and kind of, using tech as a tool rather than a crutch, I guess, is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it makes sense. How do the ride modes then? How do they translate rider input then into machine behavior?
Yeah, well, the way we talk about it is, your modern throttle, it's not really a cable. It's kind of like a conversation between, your wrist and the ECU. So these ride modes, then they control how that conversation happens. So, it's adjusting the throttle response, it's adjusting traction and wheelie control, ABS, brakes, suspension stiffness, and engine braking. Those are sort of typical ride mode mapping. So the key is really understanding what each mode is doing on your specific motorcycle. So no two bikes are the same. So you might have Ducati's enduro mode, but that's going to behave differently to, say, Honda's gravel mode.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I remember very recently taking a fuel tank off a sports bike, a modern day sports bike. It's just laden with cables and wires, and they obviously all do stuff. And it's fascinating, really, to think that this is not just, as you said, a direct throttle cable where your throttle reaction or response is one to one. It's all these things are doing stuff. I guess it's for us riders to kind of embrace the fact that these systems are there to save us. But Mark, can you tell us a bit more about the tech behind the rider aid?
Yeah, exactly. So the sort of ride modes, if you like, they're kind of on the surface, like you're saying, and then beneath, when you're looking into the tank and deeper, there's a very sophisticated system, sensors, processors, that the rider aids kind of define the safety performance, and if you look at some of those core systems, you've got traction control, and there's wheelie control, cornering ABS is a big one that's coming in that looks like it's, that could be a really fantastic safety tool. Engine braking, the suspension, like we said before, that's sort of semi-active. They've even gone sort of hill start assist, and of course your quick shifter and blippers and stuff like that. But these systems are all reactive by design. The idea is to respond when something goes wrong, and the proactive rider kind of learns how to, I guess, stay ahead of those interventions, if that makes sense.
Kind of rider aid. Let's consider the electronic rider aids. We've kind of covered that bit, but you've spoken about ARAS before as well. What is ARAS?
Yeah, ARAS, it stands for Advanced Rider Assistance Systems. And I guess, that's relatively new compared to the car stuff. The car stuff's ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, and there's all different levels up to driverless cars. So the next safety, I guess, the safety frontier, if you like, in bikes is this ARAS technology, and you can see it at the minute. They're using radar and cameras and AI to sort of kind of predict and assist rather than react so much. So those kind of key ARAS technologies that we're seeing now, you've got your adaptive cruise control and forward collision warnings, blind spot detections, that type of thing. And these systems, Bosch is a big pioneer there together with the OEMs, and they're kind of combining the radar and the IMUs to give a sort of 360 safety zone around the rider.
It's amazing how quickly they're coming on, and how we're seeing them. I find them very, really beneficial. But you've got your school, Mark. Do you see a lot of the data coming out of school relating to that?
Yeah. So we've got a data-driven platform, that we can measure the actual objective performance of riders, and then we can sort of bring in the technologies and kind of overlay, their skill scores from our data-driven systems with how the riders are interacting with these technologies. And we see clear patterns. Again, these riders who anticipate the events, like braking zones and adjust early, that higher skill scores. And we've also seen then how training that includes, understanding these systems increases, the rider's confidence, but then it's directly correlated to the skill scores too.
How do we then communicate the new technology and riding styles? How does that all kind of come together?
Yeah, well, we kind of look at that as like a three-way sort of partnership, so if you think you've got the human, which is, we want the human to be proactive, be aware, have that anticipation, with the decision making. And then the machine sort of element, that's the ARAS and the traction control, etc. That's the reactive. And then the training kind of comes in as that sort of third element, that, you've got the skill development and the feedback, and it's kind of like a bridge between them both. And when those three elements align, we spoke recently about flow state. And, when those three elements align, that's kind of where we're seeing this kind of flow state, and that a sweet spot, where the awareness and the technique and the technology all come together, sort of working in harmony, if that makes sense.
Over the last sort of 10 years, a lot of what we've talked about, or what you've mentioned just there with all of the, acronyms mainly, but all these systems and features that are helping us. And it seems a little bit overwhelming, or to some people who might not be familiar with all that. I mean, in some people's minds, my dad, he still thinks ABS is brand new technology. But in terms of the future, do you have any predictions about motorcycle safety systems? Have you spoken to you're a well-connected man. What's the sort of the next phase?
Yeah, it's super. I mean, I'm an engineer too, so I really love all this stuff. Even though we're talking about my racing and so forth, I just love the technology and the engineering. And when you ride a modern day superbike on the track, like, it's bloody fun, and the safety it is improved safety. There's no doubt about it, and then you bring in the airbag suits and stuff. It's just fantastic when I think of the amount of bones that I used to break with, without having any of that. So it's good to see. And, you see the MotoGP guys, like the crashes they're having, and like most of the time they're walking away. It's really amazing. But for sure, I mean, we're working on some stuff. We're kind of on the brink of this kind of predictive motorcycle AI. And, we've worked with OEMs and, these tier ones like Bosch before. And we've got, stuff in the pipeline now. And these systems are kind of like, will analyze your riding style. They're very, very personalized. Manage your fatigue and, looking at your heart rate, and kind of adapt like a whole new level of support, like dynamically. So if you imagine, a bike that kind of subtly adjusts the traction control when it senses you're tired, or it's sort of alerted if you're, by your body position, if it thinks you're maybe distracted. This is already kind of happening. Like, OEMs are already integrating sort of rider, biometric data into prototypes. So, but no matter how advanced the machine becomes, it's the human factor that's, I think is, it's still the strongest and the weakest, link in the chain.
And with your motorbike coach hat on, which you literally have, How are you bringing or bridging technology and skill then in that case?
Our position is like, the goal isn't to rely on the technology. It's kind of like to ride with it. We're kind of really emphasizing the mind a bit, this mental calibration between the bike and the rider, and learning how those interventions feel. So, in a controlled environment is always great. How far can you lean before your traction control steps in? How your braking pressure changes with the cornering ABS. And, I spoke about this a lot where, we have, these kind of real world evidence-based drills, kind of aviation principles, right? Recreate the crash scenario, and then, the rider practice it in controlled environment. So we do, the drills that you have done before that with the cornering, braking in the corner, we're doing that. And then we're seeing the riders, like, even though they've got cornering ABS, sort of almost like a crash-proof bike, if you almost like it's getting to that point, but the rider's still got to squeeze the lever. So, we're seeing like if we got that scale of 0 to 100 on that drill performance, most of the riders coming in to do this drill for the first time are, 20 to 30 on that score, because they're not squeezing the lever. So it's like everything else. You kind of got to practice, the rider still got to throttle, steer and brake. So the most important sensor on the bike is the one between your ears, so we always kind of push that one. But we're just saying when we take riders through those drills and we're practicing, and we need to get the manual out because all the bikes are different, right? So they understand how to adjust these rider aids. But you just see the confidence and the control going up, and reduced fatigue, more safety margins, and the riders kind of, I guess there's more connection between the rider and the bike and more like harmony. That's probably not a bad way to put it.
Yeah, that's a really neat way of doing it. Mark, this is we're almost in danger of becoming too complex, a little bit like the bikes we're talking about and all the rider aids, of course. Perhaps you can summarize what it is that we've been talking about in this episode and add a final thought or two.
I guess, the technology is a powerful ally. There's no doubt about it, but we don't want it to become our master. So, we see the best the best riders, using every tool without surrendering their responsibility, right? So, we say to the riders, be proactive and anticipate, the environment, not the electronics. Understand your systems, read the book, the manual that comes, and then train deliberately. We speak about the 10,000 hours to mastery, versus 20 hours to get your license. And so really need to train deliberately, and that's important. And then, the ARAS is amazing. Some of the stuff coming is just like, it's incredible, and embrace it, but intelligently, keep evolving. The road changes, the tech is changing, and, the future of motorcycling isn't like driverless cars. Like, we're not going to have it, riderless bikes, are we? Or maybe we will. But, I'm not interested in that. I don't think most people aren't, maybe for a taxi, but we're not replacing riders. It's about enhancing our riding experience. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, we all do it for one reason, don't we? That it makes us feel good, and we can't ever replace that feeling. Yeah, so I really love this technology. I'm a bit of a fan, certainly, of anything that helps. I think once you're familiar with the settings and the systems and the buttons and what they do and how they can help, I think rather than fearing it, we should all be embracing it. I'm a particular fan of the adaptive cruise control systems. I like those ones coming in. Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Lots of detail in that one. What can the ladies and gentlemen expect in the next episode?
Yeah, episode 20. So that one's about CAM Circle, Kamm Circle. Oh. So we'll explain it more detail, but if you Google it, you might get a bit of an inkling, but it's kind of like a rider's hack to understanding grip.
Right, you are, sir. Looking forward to that one already. Mark, thank you for your time again, and we'll see you soon.
No worries. Cheers, Michael.
Brilliant. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to Honda's Motorcycles UK as well for helping us bring this all together. Mark and I will be back next time, as you've just heard. But in the meantime, don't forget to check out all of the other Better Riding episodes. There'll be a link just in the comment section with the whole playlist, which has got every episode so far. Before I leave you, I've got 3 more places of interest to let you know about. And if you've seen any of the other episodes, you know what's coming. First of all, search for Bennetts Bike Club. That's our own social media site, exclusively for us and our friends and you guys. There's over 2,000 members in there at the moment, full of actual experts who can answer any motorcycle related questions. So if you've got a question about, I don't know, tires, then the fella from Pirelli and the fella from Bridgestone and the fella from Michelin, they're all on there, and they will give you the answers from their own handbooks, really. A similar offering can be found on Facebook. We've got a private group there called Bennetts BikeSocial. Come and find us all there. And finally, but perhaps most importantly, how about becoming a BikeSocial member? That will entitle you to access 230, I've just checked before recording this, different motorcycle apparel, clothing, and training discounts. So if you just search for BikeSocial membership, you will find it. Membership is free if you insure your bike directly with Bennetts. Otherwise, you can still access it, £6 a month or £60 a year. That's all. See you next time. Thanks a lot.
Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars, and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology and education, which is why they're committed to achieving 0 traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.